Adolf Hitler is one of the most infamous names ever etched into human history. A name that instantly evokes horror, destruction, and unanswered questions. But beyond the speeches, the uniforms, and the machinery of genocide, there exists a deeper and more unsettling mystery, one that asks not just how Hitler ruled, but what he truly believed. What if the man who plunged the world into war didn't see himself as a politician at all? What if he believed he was chosen guided by unseen forces, ancient symbols, and hidden powers shaping his destiny? And what if those beliefs quietly influenced decisions that cost tens of millions of lives? If you're ready to explore the shadows behind history's darkest regime, stay with us until the end, and make sure you're subscribed to my history profiles, where we uncover the stories history often avoids, because what you're about to hear may change how you understand the Third Reich forever. Long before Hitler became a dictator, he was something else entirely: a failed artist, a drifting young man, wandering Vienna with empty pockets and a wounded sense of purpose. Rejected from art school and isolated from society, he searched desperately for meaning in a world that had offered him none. That search did not lead him toward compassion or humility. Instead, it led him into books filled with mysticism, mythology, and radical theories that promised secret truths behind the chaos of life. These ideas whispered that history was not random, that certain people were destined to rise, and that power followed those who understood hidden laws of the universe. For a man nursing rejection and ambition, that promise was intoxicating. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Hitler began to believe that his failures were not accidents, but preparation. And once that idea took root, it refused to die. As he absorbed writings that blended nationalism with myth and fantasy, Hitler began to see the world not as a place of shared humanity, but as a battlefield governed by destiny. Symbols became more than decoration. They became proof. Ancient signs, rituals, and myths offered him a framework where violence could be justified and mercy dismissed as weakness. He didn't just admire these ideas, he internalized them. And the more he did, the more convinced he became that history itself was waiting for him to act. Was this madness, manipulation, or faith taken to its most dangerous extreme? The line between belief and delusion was already beginning to blur. When Hitler entered politics, he did not arrive alone. Around him gathered figures who spoke the language of prophecy rather than policy. Men who believed words could reshape reality itself. Among them were mentors who didn't simply teach Hitler how to persuade crowds, but how to believe in himself as something greater than a man. They spoke of spiritual destiny, racial myth, and historical inevitability. They framed Germany's suffering as a cosmic injustice and painted Hitler as the voice chosen to correct it. When he spoke, his words didn't sound like arguments, they sounded like revelations, and millions listened. It's not because they were convinced, but because they felt seen. And that emotional bond would become one of the most powerful and terrifying forces of the Third Reich. As Nazi power grew, symbols flooded every corner of German life. Flags, uniforms, architecture, and ceremonies were carefully designed to feel ancient and eternal, as if the movement were not new but reborn from a distant, glorious past. Massive rallies became spectacles of emotion, blending light, sound, and movement into something closer to ritual than politics. Individuals dissolved into crowds, thought gave way to feeling, and at the center stood Hitler, silent, waiting, then erupting, appearing less like a leader and more like a figure summoned by history itself. Whether he believed this image or merely exploited it remains debated, but one thing is certain: the illusion worked. Once belief took hold, reason struggled to survive. Hitler's obsession with hidden power extended beyond symbols and ceremonies. He became fixated on ancient relics, objects believed to carry supernatural influence over history itself. Among them was a legendary spear, tied to conquest and empire, rumored to grant invincibility to whoever possessed it. Hitler reportedly believed that control of such an artifact meant control of fate. When he finally acquired it, he was convinced that victory was inevitable. Yet from that moment forward, the war began to turn against him. Defeats mounted, allies faltered, and the empire he believed was protected by destiny began to crack. Was it coincidence, irony, or the dangerous cost of believing myth could replace strategy? Faith, for Hitler, was never about morality. He rejected compassion and empathy, embracing belief systems that glorified discipline, purity, and obedience without mercy. In this worldview, cruelty was not a flaw, it was proof of strength. Human beings were reduced to categories, symbols, and obstacles. Once people are no longer seen as individuals, atrocities become easier to justify. And justify them he did, cloaking brutality in the language of destiny and necessity. The most chilling part wasn't that these ideas existed, it was how quickly they became law. Pseudoscience and myth were transformed into state policy. Race became fate. Blood became identity. Millions were classified, tracked, and condemned not for what they had done, but for who they were said to be. All of it was framed as inevitable, as if history itself demanded sacrifice. Many who participated believed they were serving a higher cause. And once a society convinces itself that evil is necessary, stopping it becomes almost impossible. How does an entire nation cross that line? And how easily could it happen again? As the war dragged on, Hitler's faith in destiny hardened into obsession. Military setbacks were dismissed as tests. Strategic retreats were forbidden not because they were unwise, but because belief demanded defiance. To retreat would mean destiny was wrong, and Hitler could not accept that. This refusal cost lives by the millions. Cities burned. Armies were sacrificed. Reality was ignored. And still, he clung to the idea that unseen forces would intervene. They never did. By 1945, the myth had collapsed. Symbols failed. Relics offered no protection. Rituals meant nothing. In a bunker beneath a ruined city, the man who believed himself chosen by fate confronted the one force he could never dominate: truth. There was no divine rescue, no hidden power, no destiny fulfilled. Only silence, and the wreckage of a world he helped destroy. The true horror of the Third Reich lies not only in what it did, but in how it justified itself. When myth replaces truth, when belief overrides conscience, and when power goes unquestioned, history doesn't just repeat, it accelerates toward catastrophe. Adolf Hitler did not command destiny. He was consumed by delusion, and the world paid the price. That is why this story still matters. Because the danger was never mysticism or symbols alone, it was blind belief stripped of humanity. When leaders claim they are chosen, when myths excuse cruelty, and when people stop questioning power, the darkest chapters of history are never far away. This is My History Profiles, where we don't just tell history, we confront it, so we never forget what happens when belief goes unchecked. The story does not end in the bunker, because ideas rarely die when the men who carried them fall. When the Third Reich collapsed, investigators expected to find a regime built only on brute force and political calculation. Instead, they uncovered something far stranger: a state that had invested time, money, and belief into myths, symbols, and fantasies masquerading as destiny. Files revealed expeditions launched not for military advantage but to chase ancient legends. Resources were poured into proving racial myths rather than winning wars. And suddenly, a terrifying realization emerged. Hitler had not only manipulated belief, he had trusted it, even when reality screamed otherwise. After the war, survivors struggled to understand how such destruction could be driven by ideas so detached from truth. Psychologists, historians, philosophers all asked the same question in different ways. Did Hitler believe his own mythology, or did he knowingly weaponize it? The unsettling answer may be that it was both. Over time, the performance became faith. The symbols stopped being tools and became convictions. And once a leader stops distinguishing between belief and fact, entire nations are placed in danger. That transformation from manipulation to obsession is what makes this story so chilling. As documents surfaced, it became clear that Hitler's worldview left no room for doubt. Doubt was weakness. Doubt was betrayal. Those who questioned destiny were seen as enemies not just of the state, but of history itself. This mindset infected every level of power, creating an environment where loyalty mattered more than truth, and belief mattered more than evidence. Officers ignored intelligence. Generals were punished for realism. Scientists were silenced if their findings contradicted ideology. And slowly, the state drifted further from reality, trapped inside its own myth. What makes this even more dangerous is how familiar it feels. Humans are drawn to certainty, especially during chaos. When economies collapse and identities feel threatened, simple explanations become comforting if they are false. Hitler understood this instinct deeply. He didn't invent it, he exploited it. And once exploited, it became unstoppable. People weren't just following orders, they were following meaning. That is why resistance was crushed so easily. You cannot argue with destiny, you can only submit to it. Even after the war, the echoes of these beliefs did not disappear. Extremist movements across the world latched onto the same symbols, the same myths, the same promises of purity and purpose. They stripped context, ignored history, and recycled the fantasy of superiority. The tragedy is that these ideas persist, despite overwhelming evidence of where they lead. Science dismantled racial myths. History exposed the lies. Yet belief, when untethered from truth, remains stubbornly resilient. Perhaps the most haunting lesson is this: the occult was never the true danger. Symbols do not kill. Myths do not march armies. People do. The danger lies in surrendering critical thought to belief, in allowing emotion to override empathy, and in accepting destiny as an excuse for cruelty. Hitler's secret beliefs mattered not because they were mystical, but because they replaced accountability. Once responsibility is handed over to fate, anything becomes permissible. In the end, the Third Reich did not fall because destiny abandoned it. It fell because reality does not bend to delusion. No symbol can stop a tank. No relic can reverse strategy. No myth can feed a starving population or replace lost allies. The laws of the real world eventually reassert themselves, and when they do, the consequences are unforgiving. Hitler believed himself chosen until the very end. History judged him differently. And that is why this story still demands attention. It's not out of fascination with darkness, but out of responsibility to the future. Because the moment a society accepts that some lives matter less than others, the moment belief becomes justification, the moment leaders claim they act on behalf of destiny rather than humanity, that is the moment history begins to repeat its worst chapters. If there is one truth that must endure, it is this: power without conscience destroys itself. Belief without compassion becomes tyranny. Myths, when treated as truth, turn ordinary people into participants in unimaginable crimes. Remembering this is not optional, it is necessary. This is why we tell these stories on my history profiles, not to sensationalize the past, but to warn the present.